We've made it to the All-Star break, and it feels like Sacramento Kings fans deserve this break just as much as the Kings players do. Unfortunately for us all, the Kings head into the break with a hard-fought loss to the Chicago Bulls. A highly entertaining game, a fun game, a game I really enjoyed watching that results in a loss for the Kings. One day, these battles will end up going the Kings' way more often than not. It was not so tonight, but still some positives to pull from this one. De'Aaron Fox shines. Damonte Sabnis significantly more aggressive than he was in the Brooklyn Nets game. We'll talk about this Kings loss. We'll talk about what's coming up for the Kings after the All-Star break. It's all on today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off-season. If you're looking for in-depth analysis, game-by-game breakdowns, highlights, interviews with local and national experts, full coverage of your Sacramento Kings from January through December, this is the place for you, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I've covered the Sacramento Kings now for the last 8 seasons. I'm working for ABC 10 television in Sacramento. Excited, as always, to host another episode of Locked On Kings. Excited to talk about a game that, even though it resulted in a Kings loss, it's a game that I really overall enjoyed. Now, I will openly admit, and hopefully this doesn't turn some of you against me, I enjoyed this game a lot because I have been a not-so-secret Chicago Bulls fan this year. Every single year, I pick a team before the season starts. I'm not a fair weather fan, or I try not to be. I pick a team before the season starts on the East Coast, and I say, okay, that's a team, that's an Eastern Conference team that I'm going to try and follow. And a lot of times in recent memories, that team for me has been the Indiana Pacers. Well, this year, that team was the Chicago Bulls. I was fascinated with their decision to bring in DeMar DeRozan. Really liked the moves that they made at the trade deadline. I'm a big fan of Zach LaVine, like Nikola Jokic and that pickup there. Big fan of Kobe White. So I was very interested in what the Chicago Bulls team was going to be this year. I did not expect them to be towards the top of the Eastern Conference. I think they're second or third right now in the Eastern Conference. Did not expect them to be that good, but I've been following the Chicago Bulls not as closely, of course, as I follow the Kings, but they've been my real second team so far this season. I've been looking forward to this Kings and Bulls matchup for a while, selfishly, because I have an excuse to watch a full 48 minutes of Bulls basketball and not feel too guilty about it. But I was very pleased with what I got, with what we all got from the Sacramento Kings in this game. At the end of my most recent podcast, after the Kings and their really poor performance and their loss to the shorthanded Brooklyn Nets, I said that the one request that I had from the Kings in this game, because at no point, even when we found out, or actually really especially when we found out that Alex Caruso, Zach LaVine, and Lonzo Ball weren't going to be playing in this game, my expectations were not that the Kings were going to win this game. Like I was expecting a loss wholeheartedly. I just wanted to see the Kings battle. And what I wanted to see was the Kings not give an effort that suggests they're a team that's on the cusp of leaving for the All-Star break. I didn't want to see a 1-2-3 Cancun game, a getaway game, a getaway type effort. And we've seen the Kings do that many times before. In past seasons, before the All-Star break, even before the final game of the season. Go back to the season where Dave Yeager ended up being fired. That final game of the season when the Kings could have won 40 games, when they absolutely just, the bed against the Portland Trailblazers. Like, we've seen that kind of effort before where this team knows, okay, a break is here. We just have to get through these 48 minutes, and they play like they're looking forward to that break. It's like senioritis on the last day of school, right? The Kings didn't play that way. They played like they are in a play-in race, which of course they are. They played like they had something to prove. They played like they wanted to get back to the success of the first 2 games after really a disappointing and in some ways abysmal performance against the Brooklyn Nets. And that was very obvious from the get-go in this game. Of course, the biggest problem with this Kings team at this point is defense. And that is a problem that the Kings did not address. And I don't know if they really could have addressed it more than what they did at this trade deadline. The addition of Donte DiVincenzo certainly helps with the Kings defensively. I like Justin Holiday a lot. I'll talk about him more a little bit later in the show, but he helps defensively as well as helps space the floor. Domantas Sabonis is the big pickup that the Kings made, of course, at this trade deadline. Known more for his offense than his defense, has certainly helped the team immediately, but defensively isn't the best. We know De'Aaron Fox, not the best defender. This Kings team needs help defensively, and of course, they need help on the perimeter as well. That's going to be my expectation for this offseason for the Sacramento Kings. And this offseason, I feel like I say it every year, this offseason is extremely important for the Kings. It truly is, because expectations for next season are going to be even higher than they were for this season, because the Kings now have a pairing of De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. Fox has his all-star to play with. At that point, they'll have an offseason, they'll have a training camp, they'll have multiple practices to work together. That excuse will be removed. Even if I still expect the Kings to be very much in the play-in race, and I stand by what I said when the Kings made that trade and traded away Tyrese Halliburton. If you're trading away Tyrese and bringing in Domantas Sabonis, you better be a better basketball team immediately. And I think we can say marginally the Kings have been a better basketball team to this point, but it doesn't matter if there aren't actually results tied to it. Now, I know there are still Kings fans listening that say, I don't mind losses like this. The Kings play well. The Kings get more comfortable playing together. Fox and Sabonis look good, and the Kings lose. Hey, better draft pick, better odds for adding a key player and going into next season with an even better core. I hear that. I do hear that. I do understand that. I personally, as much as that might be the right path, and as much as that is a path that I was actually lobbying for just a few weeks ago, when you make a trade like the Kings made, it's still, for me, a tough pill to swallow if the Kings were to trade Tyrese Halliburton and not be better and not be good and not have a legitimate chance at making the plan. Just the addition of Domantas Sabonis, just the additions that the Kings have made, turning Marvin Bagley into Donte DiVincenzo, that should be enough to force the Kings into the conversation, or be more of the conversation than they had any business being with that former group. But this upcoming offseason, of course, they're going to have an opportunity to really address their two major needs, defense and three-point shooting. And I'm very excited to see how Monte McNair approaches that, whether he does it in the draft, where he does it through trades, trading away Richaun Holmes, who continues to really struggle. And I said it on yesterday's, or rather most recent pod, that he just needs to simplify things to me. He needs to go back to what he does best. And even right now, we're seeing him struggle fumbling to catch lobs, to finish around the rim, which is normally automatic for him. Just nothing's going right for him right now. And I feel for the guy, and the Kings need him to figure it out. One, for their chances at making the plan, and two, for him to maintain a decent amount of value, or I think he'll have pretty significant value at the or this upcoming offseason, that the Kings could use him to maybe acquire a 3-and-D player or two. So it'll be interesting to see how Monty addresses those problems. For now, the Kings will have to live with those problems for the remainder of this season, which means they're going to need more out of DiVincenzo, more out of Justin Holiday, more defensively out of everybody. And they were missing Davion Mitchell tonight, and it showed. The Kings rely heavily on Davion Mitchell for their perimeter defense. They are absolutely torched by the Bulls from the perimeter in this game. I recognize that the Kings offensively had a pretty solid night, a significantly better night than what we saw in the Brooklyn Nets game, where they only scored, like 85 points or something like that. The Kings scored 118. So offensively, significantly better game for them. But it was very apparent to me, even if the Kings shot 51% from the field, 40% from three-point range, 90%, 20 of 22, love to see that from the free throw line. This was a good night offensively for the Sacramento Kings. But still, when you watch how difficult it was for the Kings to score on offense, even if they were having success, it was significantly more difficult for them to score than it was for the Bulls to score on them. And the fact that the Kings got off to such a good start in this game, De'Aaron Fox got off to a great start in this game. 14 points in the first quarter, almost was 17, had a buzzer beater 3 at the end of the quarter that was taken off just half a second, or really a fraction of the second, too late. The Kings had that good of an offensive start to this game, which is exactly what I wanted to see. And they couldn't build any kind of lead, any kind of cushion, because the defense just wasn't there. And that's a hurdle that this team has been trying to get over, not just this season. That's a hurdle this Kings team's been trying to get over for over a decade. It's very apparent to me, watching the Kings on a good offensive night, when they're, one, not able to create separation, and two, even when they're successful offensively, they have to work harder for it than their opponents do on the other end of the floor. That really jumped off the page to me in this game. And of course, we have to talk about DeMar DeRozan and Coby White. I'll talk about White first because DeRozan is obviously the main event here. But Coby White, he had a 30-plus point performance against the Sacramento Kings last season. He is a really solid player. I like Coby White a lot. And when you have a guy like Lonzo Ball, when you have Alex Caruso, both who are out in this game, when you have Levine, when you have DeRozan, when you have Nikola Vucevic, there are a lot of players on this team that can overshadow Coby White. And I want to make sure that people recognize how talented he is. I mean, he finished with 31 points in this game in just shy of 40 minutes, 11 of 19, 6 of 11 from three-point range. Super efficient player, also 5 rebounds, 6 assists. Just an amazing game for Coby White. And he's been doing it all season long, even if it doesn't go as noticed as it should. And when I say all season long, I don't mean he's scoring 31 points in every single game, but he has been this solid player for the Bulls for a long time. He is one of the major reasons why the Bulls are 38-21, despite the fact that they've been so injury-riddled and COVID-riddled this season. You would think the Bulls, with how good they have been, it would be because they have been together, stayed together, been successful, and not had injuries and not had COVID issues. This team has been stripped to the bone at times this season, and still they're this good. So, and a lot of that has to do with how good Coby White and the role players of this Bulls team have been. But of course, DeMar DeRozan, who was an acquisition for the Bulls, an acquisition met with a lot of, I think, criticism this offseason. I liked the move, but it was heavily criticized this offseason, the Bulls acquiring DeMar DeRozan. He is an MVP candidate. He has been phenomenal, reminding everybody that the mid-range game is not dead. Kings did all they could against him. Harrison Barnes had some good defensive possessions. Mo Harkless had some good defensive possessions that were still called as fouls, and I felt bad for anyone trying to guard DeMar DeRozan in this game. I felt bad for anyone trying to guard DeMar DeRozan, period, right now, because he's on another level. He finished with 38 points, 16 of 27 shooting. He's just phenomenal to watch. And it's great to see a 32-year-old enjoying the success that DeMar DeRozan is enjoying right now, reminding people around the world, people in Toronto, that, hey, I got game. I know you traded me away for Kawhi and ended up winning a championship. I get that. But that doesn't define me as a player. And he kind of slid under the radar and faded away a little bit with his time in San Antonio. He is very much back on the map in Chicago, and I really enjoy watching him play. But this is a Locked On Kings podcast, not the Locked On Bulls podcast. So let's talk about the Kings a little bit more when we come back. I'm going to talk about the great game that De'Aaron Fox has had, the amount of success that De'Aaron Fox has enjoyed recently since the trade. Talk about the play of Domantas Sabonis, a nice bounce back game for him, even in a loss. Talk about Justin Holiday. Talk a little bit about the Kings offensively playing well, but looking kind of out of control at times. Plus, I'm going to fill you in on the upcoming schedule for the Sacramento Kings after the AllStar break, and all of the Locked On Kings content coming for you during the AllStar break. That's all still to come, so stick around for that. But also make sure you listen to me as I tell you about Prize Picks. We make sure to endorse things here and get advertisers that we care about and that we firmly believe our audience will care about. That's why Prize Picks is so important, because Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. It's my favorite way to play daily fantasy for the NBA. And we know fantasy basketball, fantasy NBA, it's not on the same tier as fantasy football or maybe even fantasy baseball. But Prize Picks brings a whole new element of daily fantasy to the NBA that I think is more enjoyable than fantasy football. And this is coming from someone who almost won his league this year. Yeah, almost. I'll hold my participation trophy proud. But Prize Picks is easy to use. It's extremely fun. You pick 2 to 5 players and over/under on their projections. You can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. You're not facing anybody. It's you versus the house, basically. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's super easy. Prize Picks is safe. They offer fast withdrawals. You can use their award-winning app on both the App Store or Google Play, so it's super accessible, and they have a variety of options. You can get any prop that you can think of, from points scored to rebounds to even steals. You can do mixed sport entries, so it's not just basketball. You can bet on an NBA basketball game along with an NHL hockey game, or during football season, it was a lot of NBA and NFL betting going on at the same time. They have college basketball, college football, MLB, soccer, MMA, and more. So much on Prize Picks for you to enjoy. And for a limited time, Right now, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all Locked On Kings listeners. All you have to do is get $50 for free using promo code NBA if your player or any player of yours in your first PrizePick entry scores a single point. It's really, really easy. It's almost a guaranteed $50. Again, you use promo code NBA to cash in on that offer at PrizePicks. 33 points, 9 assists, 14 of 26 from the field, 3 of 4 from three-point range, 6 rebounds, 2 steals. That's the stat line for De'Aaron Fox tonight in the loss in Chicago. And this stat line has been less of an anomaly than it had been this season to this point. Since the Tyrese Halliburton trade, De'Aaron Fox has had a 27-point game in the win against the Minnesota Timberwolves, 27 points, 8 rebounds in that game. He had a 26.4 assist game in the win against the Washington Wizards, a 26.3 assist game in the loss to the Brooklyn Nets, and now a 33.9 assist, 6 rebound game against the Chicago Bulls. In the month of February, he's averaging 27 points per game. He's shooting 49% from the field, 42% from for three-point range, and a very exciting 87% from the free throw line. De'Aaron Fox is playing really, really well right now. And for those who may not have listened to one of my most recent podcasts where I talked about it's absurd to think that Tyrese Halliburton was the problem, that Tyrese Halliburton was holding De'Aaron Fox back. That's not my point here at all. My point is this different Kings team, this system that now features a pass-dominant big, a big that you can run your offense through, who can also get his and Damonte Sabnis. De'Aaron fits significantly better with that, clearly better with that, and is more comfortable playing with that than he is playing with another extremely talented but ball-dominant guard in Tyrese Halliburton. Even if Tyrese was a guy who looked for his teammates, who encouraged others to get theirs and would try and help them get theirs, he and De'Aaron Fox, we saw clearly this season, they were struggling to figure it out. I'm not saying that it never would have or could have worked. I'm not going to say that at all, because I still think that had the Kings held on to the two of them, next season could have looked a lot better. But clearly, Fox is playing extremely well, back to how good he was last season when he had to be the guy, except now he still is the guy, but with a 2-time All-Star big to partner with. And he looks a lot more comfortable. He looks a lot more fluid. He's very successful right now. And look, I've seen people posting about how good Tyrese Halliburton is playing in Indiana. Hell, I've been sharing Tyrese Halliburton's stat lines here on the Locked On Kings podcast. And you know what? I'm going to do it again, because finally Tyrese and the Pacers got their first win since the trade tonight. And Tyrese had 20 points and 14 assists in that game. His 4 games with the Pacers, 23 points, 6 assists, 4 3-pointers, 22 points, 16 assists, 6 3-pointers, 17 points, 8 assists, 3 3-pointers, and 21 points, or rather 20 points, 14 assists tonight. Tyrese is shooting 48% from the field, 45% from three-point range, and 81% from the free throw line. Tyrese Halliburton is playing fantastic for the Indiana Pacers. Fantastic. And deserves recognition for that. But I read stats off of a Stat Muse post. That's where I was getting those numbers from that I just read for you. And I'm reading through the comments. Man, the Kings are regretting this trade. God, Kings fans, this must be hard for you to see. And some Kings fans are saying, man, this sucks. I like Tyrese so much, and I knew he's going to be successful. And lo and behold, here he is. Doesn't surprise me one bit. But hey, Stat Muse, how about we post De'Aaron Fox's numbers since that trade? Because you know what? De'Aaron Fox's numbers are better than Tyrese's numbers. Maybe not the assist numbers, of course, but overall, his numbers are better. And on top of that, Kings are 2-2. Tyrese is 1-3. Now, the Kings should be better than the Indiana Pacers based off of the state of their roster right now, and I would argue that 2-2 compared to 1-3 is not great for the Kings. It should be better than that. But it's okay. Like, my point is not to poo-poo anything that Tyrese is doing. My point is not to poo-poo any Kings fans who regret seeing Tyrese Halliburton leave. There's still much of me that regrets seeing Tyrese Halliburton leave. But De'Aaron Fox right now is playing extremely well without him. And in this game in particular, in 3 out of the 4 games, Fox and Sabonis have played well together. Domantas Sabonis had a very solid game against the Chicago Bulls here tonight, worthy of pointing out because Domantas Sabonis said himself after the Brooklyn Nets game that he was disappointed with how he played, that he needs to be more aggressive. He basically said, look, the Kings traded for me to be the player that I've been, to be myself. And in that game, he admitted that he wasn't himself. So he comes back out, and again, on a getaway game against one of the best teams, not just in the East, but in the league, he came out aggressive. And he performed for the Kings. 22 points, 10 of 15 shooting, went finished with 12 rebounds, 8 assists, nearly a triple-double, 2 steals. Domantas Sabonis was very, very good in this game. Now, he could have been even better, especially in the first half. I felt that Sabonis was aggressive, but the numbers weren't there. And the Kings as a whole were really aggressive offensively. I appreciate the officials for letting both teams play. Now, there were some calls that the Kings should have gotten that didn't. There are also some calls the Bulls should have gotten that didn't. Of course, there were some calls that DeMar DeRozan shouldn't have gotten but did. It's just going to happen. Happens with every game. I appreciate for the most part that these officials were pretty consistent throughout the entire game. They were letting both teams play. They were letting a lot of physicality happen. And the Kings, to their credit, were going right at that physicality. Very different from what we saw against the Brooklyn Nets, where the Kings were backing away from all physicality. If the Kings had played against the Nets the way they played tonight against the Bulls, they would have beaten the Nets. I have no doubt about that in my mind. They shied away from contact in that game. In this game, they embraced it. Now, at times, that aggressiveness almost looked out of control. Looked like that for Domantas Sabonis a couple times. Looked like that for De'Aaron Fox a couple times. Looked like that for Donte DiVincenzo. The Kings were trying to get downhill. They were attacking the rim. Loved to see it. And it benefited them in the sense that their shooting percentage was at 51%. Their three-point shooting percentage was at 40%. They still got 12 threes in a game that they weren't just chucking up a ton of them for the sake of chucking them up like they were against the Brooklyn Nets. It was a good overall offensive performance for the Kings, and still at times things got out of control. And I give credit to the Chicago Bulls defense for making things difficult for the Kings at times as well. I also like that this game could have gotten out of hand a number of times, especially in the third quarter. But the Kings managed to rally back. Multiple times their Kings rallied back in this game. Multiple times they were against the wall or against the ropes, and they bounced back and they pushed through. I appreciate what I saw overall from the Kings in this game, even if I still recognize problems, and I'm not trying to make silver linings, or there's no such thing this season, right, as a feel-good win. But I personally was entertained and happy with a lot of what I saw from the Kings in this game, including what Justin Holiday did as well. I'm a big fan of Justin Holiday. Now, he had a 6 of 11 three-point shooting night. All of his buckets came from beyond the three-point line. He only had one shot that wasn't from beyond the arc. But I like Justin Holiday a lot. The type of player Justin Holiday is, that 3-and-D type player, gives you length as a wing, can provide more than enough on the defensive end, and can space the floor. Kings need about 2 or 3 more Justin Holiday type players this offseason. And I'm glad that he's under contract for one more year. I'm a big fan of Justin Holiday. I'm also a big fan of the AllStar Break. I'm a big fan of, I'm going to miss Kings basketball, don't get me wrong, but I'm glad that we have a break from it. And I will be taking a little bit of a break here on Locked On Kings, but not as much as you may expect. I actually have a lot of great content coming for you on Locked On Kings during this All-Star break. And the schedule for the Kings after the All-Star break is tough, but there's also some winnable games in there. We'll talk about all of that here when we come back after I tell you about Bet Online. In addition to making money on Prize Picks, which I told you about earlier, Bet Online is a phenomenal way to cash in on your overall Sacramento Kings, NBA, or just sports knowledge. Football is over for the season, and I know that makes a lot of us sad, but thankfully basketball is in full steam, both pro and college hoops, which with March Madness going to be here sooner than later, with the NBA playoffs already looming, just night by night with the Sacramento Kings. You can make money on Bet Online, from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach even is going to land. BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball, of course. BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information happening right now. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action at BetOnline, where the game starts. So not all games are complete in the NBA tonight at the time of this recording, but the Kings hovering around 2.5, 3 games back of that 10th playoff spot, still very much available. It's going to be difficult with this upcoming schedule as the Kings enjoy their time off with this All-Star break. Won't play again until a week from tomorrow, the next Thursday, when they will host the Denver Nuggets. I'm hoping the Kings will use this time wisely in the sense that players, of course, that are battling some injuries, a little banged up, will use that time to heal. But this is still a new group of players, a new group of guys. And I'm not expecting players to spend all their time in the practice facility during this break. But I would hope that during this time, Fox, Sabonis, this Kings group, they get time together that they haven't had yet. They get some much needed in-season practice time to work together and gear up, prepare themselves as best as they can for these final 22 games or whatever it is, because every single game is going to be important. And it's not going to be an easy remainder of the season for the Kings. There are, though, some very winnable games out there. They take on the Denver Nuggets twice to come back from the All-Star break, once at home and once on the road with a couple days off in between, or rather 1 day off in between. They actually face the Nuggets 3 times in the next 8 games. So got to find a way to get at least one of those. 2 would be great. The Kings had a lot of success against the Nuggets last season. Of course, that was last season, very different team. And the Nuggets themselves are playing pretty good basketball right now. Of course, they have a superstar MVP in Nikola Jokic. I'm not sure how the Kings are going to handle that. Good luck, Damonte Sabnis. But 2 games against the Nuggets. Then you have a game in Oklahoma City against the Thunder. You're 1-1 against the Thunder, but last time you played the Thunder in OKC, you were kind of embarrassed. Then massive games for the Kings against the Pelicans and the Spurs. Mainly that Pelicans game is huge. The Pelicans made a big trade, the CJ McCollum trade, to try and make their push for the play-in. Kings need to win that game. Absolutely need to win that game. San Antonio Spurs, not as big, but they are also a team that's in that range for the Kings. That's a game that can have not only potential play-in implications, but also potential draft implications. So honestly, Kings fans might be rooting for the Kings to lose that game. If the Kings lose to the Pelicans, we might all be rooting for the Kings to lose that game. But that's the second night of a back-to-back. The Kings play the Pelicans on the second, followed by the Spurs on the third. Games against the Mavericks, Knicks, Nuggets again, Jazz, Bulls, Bucks, Celtics, Suns. Oh boy. Just try and get through that stretch alive if you can. Still with a chance to make the plan. Because after that, it's a matchup that I'm really looking forward to. March 23rd in Indiana. Kings, Pacers. The Tyrese Halliburton revenge game. Will Tyrese Halliburton have a better game than Domantas Sabonis will? Will Tyrese Halliburton have a better game than De'Aaron Fox will? Hopefully the Kings win that game. Boy, if they lose that game, oof, it's going to be tough. But after the Pacers, they have the Magic, Heat, Rockets twice, Warriors, Pelicans again, Clippers and Suns. Winnable games in there, hard games in there. I have no idea what to predict. I mean, if I was a betting man, I certainly wouldn't put money on the Kings actually making the playoffs through the play-in, because betting money on the Kings to make the playoffs is just suicidal at this point. Might as well light it on fire, or at least that's the way it's been for the last decade and a half. But it's not out of the realm of possibility either, like it was maybe 2 weeks ago. Completely out of the realm of possibility before the trade deadline. It'll be fun remainder of the season. I'm looking forward to that. It also will be a fun All-Star break here on Locked On Kings, because I have some great content coming for you. Just because the Kings are taking a break doesn't mean Locked On Kings is taking a break. I have great content. Tomorrow, Sean Cunningham from ABC 10, my colleague, long time covering the Sacramento Kings, big fan, or rather friend here of the Locked On Kings podcast. I hope he's a fan of the podcast too. Sean will join me for the first time in a long time. We're going to talk about everything Kings. We're going to talk about the trade deadline moves, get his opinions on everything the Kings are doing, talk about the play-in race, talk about this upcoming offseason, the moves that the Kings have to make, expectations for next season even, talking about this upcoming draft, whether or not the Kings should care about draft position at this point versus a play-in spot. We're going to discuss a ton of stuff. And Sean has been in the trenches covering this Kings team, not just this season, but for years. So he and I will be able to chop it up, go back and forth. I'm looking forward to that conversation a lot. Over the All-Star break, I'll have a conversation with the Locked On Bucks host Kane Pittman. He and I are going to have a lengthy discussion about Donte DiVincenzo, what to realistically expect for the Kings from DiVincenzo, what he can be for the Kings short-term and long-term. Kane and I will discuss that. I will have Rafael Barlow, our Locked On NBA draft guru. He is going to join me finally. I had him planned to join me a lot earlier before the Kings made their trades, because I thought the Kings were going to be looking at a top draft spot and only caring about that going forward. Things have changed a little bit since the trade deadline, but I had a lot of you reach out and tell me, hey, I still want draft coverage on Locked On Kings. I want to know more about this draft class. Rafael Barlow will be able to fill us in on all of that. And I'm doing another Locked On Kings roundtable. I'm going to be joined, I believe, by Franklin Cardicelli from the Return of the Roar podcast, Brendan Nunez from Kings Pulse and the Kings Pulse podcast and the Kings Herald. I'll be joined by Jill Adge, and I'll also be joined by Kenny Caraway from ESPN 1320. So, and Jill Adge hosts the Kings podcast for Hoopball. So there is going to be a lot of expertise, a lot of good conversation in that roundtable. If you haven't been here for a Locked On Kings roundtable before, we just all kind of sit together and just discuss the current and future events of the Sacramento Kings. We'll talk the trade. We'll talk the play-in and playoff race. There's going to be a lot of good content coming in that as well. That is all between now and the Kings returning to action next Thursday. So make sure you stick with Locked On Kings during this All-Star break. We'll continue to provide great content for you. I'm so thankful for the support of Locked On Kings, especially recently. The numbers have been through the roofs with the trade deadline. I hope that continues for the remainder of this season. Thank you all. Of course, returning long-time listeners, you guys are my OGs. You're my favorites. You absolutely know that I love you so much. And new listeners, y'all are my favorites too. The new listeners that have reached out to me that have said, hey, I just discovered this podcast. Love it so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you will stick around with us. A lot of listeners from other teams, Indiana Pacers fans, a lot of listeners of the Locked On Pistons podcast, Pistons fans, Bucks fans are reaching out saying, hey, I'm watching Kings basketball a little bit more because some of my favorite players were traded to the Kings. Y'all are great as well. I hope you can become, or the Kings can become your second favorite team, or maybe you can betray your old team for the Kings. Our doors are always open, but I appreciate all the support. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for leaving reviews for the Locked On Kings podcast. If you haven't done that yet, Apple Podcasts or iTunes, great place to do that. Helps us out a ton. You can also leave a review on Spotify now. No like custom review, but just hit 5 stars. That would be great. Those numbers of reviews go up every single day. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for your support as always. And I hope you will enjoy the break during All-Star weekend and beyond. But I also hope that you'll continue to tune in here to Locked On Kings. Until next time, tomorrow, my conversation with Sean Cunningham. My name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.